She stood in the lobby of a billion-dollar empire, dripping wet, clutching a plastic bag, and wearing shoes that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. To the high-powered executives strutting by, she was invisible. To the ambitious new director of operations, she was a target, a piece of trash to be mocked and thrown out. They laughed at her silence. They sneered at her simplicity. But they made one fatal calculation error. They didn't check the name on the building's deed, and they certainly didn't know that the woman they were humiliating was the only person in the world who could fire the CEO. This is the story of how arrogance destroyed a career in minutes. The rain in Chicago doesn't just fall, it assaults you. It was a freezing, relentless downpour that turned the magnificent mile into a blurred watercolor of grey concrete and yellow taxis. At the base of the Sterling Tower, a 40-story monolith of glass and steel that housed the headquarters of Sterling and Vance, one of the most prestigious architectural firms in North America, the revolving doors spun rhythmically. Men in $3,000 Italian suits and women clicking their heels in red-bottomed stilettos rushed in, shaking off umbrellas, desperate to escape the gloom. Then there was Eleanor. Eleanor Vance stood outside the heavy glass doors for a moment, catching her breath. She was 52, though today she looked 10 years older. The rain had plastered her greying auburn hair to her forehead. She wasn't wearing a trench coat or a designer parka. She was wearing a thick, slightly pilled wool cardigan wrapped over a simple floral dress she'd bought at a department store 3 years ago. On her feet were sensible, orthopedic walking shoes that were currently soaked through to her socks. In her hand, she clutched a reusable grocery bag, the kind you get for 99 cents at Trader Joe's, which protected a Tupperware container and a heavily taped manila envelope. She looked like a woman who had taken a wrong turn on her way to a bus stop. She certainly didn't look like she belonged in the lobby of a company that designed penthouses for Saudi princes and tech billionaires. Eleanor pushed through the revolving door. The sudden silence of the lobby was jarring. The air smelled of expensive white tea and polished marble. She shivered, wiping water from her face, leaving a small puddle on the pristine floor. "Jesus, look at that!" A voice sliced through the ambient hum of the lobby. Standing near the security desk, flanked by 2 nervous-looking interns, was Jessica Thorne. Jessica was 34, sharp as a tack, and terrifyingly ambitious. She had been hired 6 months ago as the new director of client relations, a role she performed with the warmth of a glacier. Jessica was beautiful in a severe way. Sleek blonde bob, a tailored black suit that cost more than Eleanor's car, and eyes that constantly scanned the room for threats or opportunities. Today, Jessica was stressed. The board of directors was meeting in 2 hours. Rumor had it that the CEO, Arthur Vance, was going to announce a major restructuring. Jessica needed to be perfect. She needed the lobby clear. She needed the atmosphere to scream power. And then she saw Eleanor. "Security!" Jessica snapped, her voice echoing slightly. A young security guard, new to the job, looked up from his console. His name tag read, Kevin. Kevin was 19 and terrified of Jessica. "Yes, Miss Thorne?" "Why is there a homeless woman dripping on my Italian marble?" Jessica pointed a manicured finger at Eleanor, who was currently trying to dry her glasses on her wet sleeve. Eleanor looked up, blinking. She hadn't realized anyone was talking to her. She offered a small, tired smile. "Oh, hello," Eleanor said, her voice soft and slightly raspy. "I'm sorry about the mess. The taxi dropped me off a block away because of the traffic." Jessica marched over, her heels clicking like gunshots on the floor. She stopped 3 feet from Eleanor, wrinkling her nose as if she smelled something rotting. "This is a place of business, ma'am," Jessica said, her tone dripping with condescension. Not a shelter. You cannot loiter here. Eleanor paused, adjusting her grip on the grocery bag. I'm not loitering. I'm here to see Arthur. Arthur Vance. The two interns behind Jessica exchanged a look. One of them stifled a giggle. Jessica let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. You're here to see the CEO? Arthur Vance? Yes, Eleanor said simply. Is he in his office? I know he usually has the board prep meeting at 10, but I really need to give him this. She lifted the grocery bag slightly. Jessica stepped closer, invading Eleanor's personal space. She loomed over the older woman, using her height and heels to intimidate. Listen to me, Jessica hissed, lowering her voice so the receptionists wouldn't hear the venom. We have a very strict security protocol. We don't allow solicitors. We don't allow beggars. And we certainly don't allow delusional fans to wander in off the street demanding to see the CEO. Arthur Vance doesn't know you. He doesn't interact with people. Like you. Eleanor's brow furrowed. She wasn't angry, just confused. It had been a few years since she'd come to the office. She preferred the quiet of their lake house in Michigan. But usually, people were kinder. I think there's a misunderstanding, Eleanor said, her voice steadying. My name is Eleanor. If you just call his assistant, Margaret, she'll... Margaret is busy, Jessica cut her off. She is preparing for the most important meeting of the fiscal year. She doesn't have time to field calls from a wet dog who wandered in from the storm. The insult hung in the air. Eleanor blinked, her face flushing slightly. It wasn't shame, it was shock. She had forgotten how cruel the corporate ladder could be. That was unnecessary, Eleanor said quietly. What is necessary, Jessica countered, checking her diamond-encrusted watch, is for you to leave. Now, before I have Kevin physically remove you. She turned to the guard. Kevin, escort this woman out. Kevin hesitated. He looked at Eleanor. There was something about her, a quiet dignity that didn't match her ragged appearance. Ms. Thorne, she says she knows Mr. Vance. Maybe we should just check the list. Jessica spun around, her eyes blazing. Excuse me, are you questioning my judgment? Do you want to be working the night shift at the warehouse in Gary, Indiana? Because that can be arranged by lunch. Kevin paled. No, ma'am. He walked around the desk, approaching Eleanor with an apologetic look. Ma'am, please. I don't want any trouble. You have to go. Eleanor looked at Kevin, then back at Jessica. She took a deep breath. She could have pulled rank right there. She could have screamed. She could have pulled the phone out of her bag and dialed Arthur's direct line. But Eleanor Vance didn't work that way. She was a woman of immense patience. She wanted to see how far this rot went. If this woman was a director, what kind of culture was Arthur running upstairs? I'm not leaving, Eleanor said, planting her feet. I have something vital for Arthur. It concerns the board meeting. Jessica stared at her. An idea seemed to form in her mind, a cruel, twisted idea. She saw the grocery bag. She saw the desperation in Eleanor's stance. Jessica smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. You have something for the meeting? Jessica asked, her voice changing from aggressive to mockingly sweet. Yes, Eleanor said. Is it a delivery? Jessica asked. Did Arthur order lunch? Or perhaps dry cleaning? Eleanor hesitated. It's lunch. Sort of. And documents. Jessica clapped her hands together, turning to the interns. You see? I told you. She's a delivery driver. A confused, very wet delivery driver. Jessica turned back to Eleanor. Okay, fine. If you have a delivery for Mr. Vance, I can't stop you from doing your job, can I? But you can't go up in the main elevators looking like that. You'll scare the investors. I don't mind taking the service elevator, Eleanor said. She had taken it many times before when she was moving art supplies into the building in the early days. "Oh, you won't be taking any elevator just yet," Jessica said, pointing toward a stack of heavy boxes near the mailroom entrance. "If you want to go up, you can earn your passage. The janitorial staff is short-handed today. We have a spill in the break room on the 4th floor, and these boxes need to go to the mailroom." Eleanor stared at her. "You want me to clean a spill?" "I want you to prove you're not a security threat," Jessica lied smoothly. "If you're really here to help Arthur, you'll help his company. Clean the spill on 4, drop those boxes, and then, maybe, I'll let you drop off your little bag of sandwiches to Margaret." It was a power play, a humiliation ritual. Jessica wanted to see this woman on her knees, scrubbing the floor, just to prove she could make it happen. It was a sick way to relieve her own stress about the upcoming board meeting. Eleanor looked at the boxes. She looked at the smirking interns. She looked at Jessica, whose eyes were cold and dead. Eleanor tightened her grip on her bag. "Fine," she whispered. "Speak up," Jessica commanded. "I said fine," Eleanor said louder. "I will handle it." "Good," Jessica snapped. "Kevin, give her a visitor badge. Mark it contractor, janitorial, and make sure she doesn't steal the silverware." As Jessica turned on her heel and strutted toward the executive elevators, laughing with her interns, she didn't see the look in Eleanor's eyes. It wasn't the look of a defeated woman. It was the look of a matriarch who had just realized her house was full of termites, and she was about to burn the infestation out. Eleanor took the sticky janitorial badge from a shame-faced Kevin and pinned it to her wet cardigan. "I'm really sorry, Mom," Kevin whispered. "Don't be, Kevin," Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave, sounding suddenly very authoritative. "You're doing your job. But Ms. Thorne, she has no idea what job she's really applying for today." Eleanor walked toward the service elevator, dragging the heavy boxes Jessica had pointed to. The ride up was slow. The metal doors reflected her disheveled image. She wasn't just bringing Arthur his lunch. The documents in her bag were the original partnership agreements from 1995, the ones that proved that Arthur Vance owned 49% of the company, and Eleanor Vance owned 51%. She pressed the button for the 4th floor. The game had begun. The service elevator rattled and groaned as it climbed to the 4th floor, a stark contrast to the silent, frictionless glide of the executive lifts. When the doors slid open, Eleanor Vance wasn't greeted by marble and art, but by the chaotic hum of the engine room, the open-plan floor where the junior architects, draftsmen, and analysts worked themselves to the bone. The air here was stale, smelling of ozone from the printers and burnt coffee. Eleanor stepped out, adjusting the heavy box of printer paper in her arms. Her back ached. It had been 20 years since she had done manual labor like this. Back then, it was because she and Arthur couldn't afford movers. Today, it was because a woman named Jessica Thorne wanted to see her suffer. She found the break room easily enough. It was the source of the commotion. A large urn of coffee had been knocked over, sending a dark, steaming river across the cheap linoleum tiles. 2 young men in shirt sleeves were standing near the puddle, laughing, holding empty mugs. They didn't move to clean it up. They didn't even put a wet floor sign down. They just watched the brown liquid spread toward the carpet. "I'm telling you," one of them said, leaning against the counter. "Vance is losing it. The old man is soft. He turned down the casino project in Vegas because of ethical concerns. Who cares about ethics when there's a $10 million commission on the table?" The other man snorted. "That's why Jessica is pushing for the restructuring. If she gets the COO spot, she'll override him. She's brutal, but she brings in the cash." Eleanor froze. She stood in the doorway, the janitorial badge crooked on her chest. They were talking about a hostile takeover. They were talking about ousting her husband, and they were pinning their hopes on Jessica. She walked forward, setting the box down on a table with a heavy thud. The two men jumped, turning to look at her. Their expressions shifted instantly from surprise to dismissal. To them, she wasn't a threat. She was the help. "Finally," the first man said, gesturing at the floor. "Took you long enough. It's starting to smell." Eleanor looked at the puddle, then at the men. "There are paper towels right there," she said softly, pointing to the dispenser. "You could have stopped it from hitting the carpet." The man laughed, an ugly, incredulous sound. "Excuse me? I don't get paid to wipe floors. That's your job. That's why you have the badge, isn't it?" Eleanor stared at him. She memorized his face. "Brad," his lanyard said. "Junior analyst." "Right," Eleanor said, her voice tight. "My job." She knelt. The water from the rain on her dress was still damp, making the movement uncomfortable. She grabbed a handful of paper towels and began to blot the coffee. It was a humiliating tableau. The owner of the majority share of the company on her hands and knees, wiping up a mess made by an employee who wasn't fit to shine her shoes. As she worked, she listened. Invisibility was a superpower. People say things in front of the cleaning staff they would never say in front of a boss. "Jessica is meeting with the external investors at noon," Brad continued, ignoring Eleanor completely. "She's going to pitch the new direction. High volume, low cost. Cut the custom design department. Turn Sterling and Vance into a factory." Eleanor's hand paused on the floor. Cut the custom design department? That was Arthur's soul. That was the heart of the company. Jessica wasn't just rude. She was a cancer eating the business from the inside out. "Here, let me help you with that." The voice was soft, kind. Eleanor looked up. A young woman, maybe 22, had knelt beside her. She had dark circles under her eyes and ink stains on her fingers. Her name tag read, "Sarah, intern." Sarah grabbed a wad of paper towels and started scrubbing the other side of the spill. "What are you doing?" Brad snapped. "Sarah, you have the renderings due in an hour. Don't waste time helping the janitor." "It'll take 2 minutes, Brad," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "And she's not the janitor. She's a person. She's soaking wet." "Look at her." Sarah turned to Eleanor, offering a warm, sympathetic smile. "I'm sorry about them. It's a stressful day. Are you okay?" "You're shivering." Eleanor felt a lump form in her throat. Amidst the sharks, she had found a dolphin. "I'm fine, dear," Eleanor said, patting Sarah's hand with her own wet, soapy hand. "You shouldn't be down here. You'll ruin your skirt." "It's just coffee," Sarah shrugged. "My mum worked cleaning houses for 30 years. I know how hard it is. Here, take this." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, sealed packet of hand warmers. "I keep these for the office. The AC is always freezing. Put them in your pockets." Eleanor took the warmers. They were small, cheap things, but in that moment, they felt more valuable than the diamond necklace sitting in her safe at home. "Thank you, Sarah," Eleanor said, her voice gaining a hint of that steel she had shown in the lobby. "I won't forget this." "Forget what?" Jessica's voice cracked through the room like a whip. The temperature in the break room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jessica Thorne stood in the doorway, flanked by her 2 shadows. She had come down to check on the progress. Sarah scrambled to her feet, looking terrified. "Miss Thorne, I was getting coffee and there was a spill." Jessica ignored Sarah and zeroed in on Eleanor, who was slowly standing up, clutching the wet paper towels. "I see you're taking your time," Jessica said, stepping into the room. She looked at the clean floor. Then, at Eleanor's wet, miserable appearance, it clearly gave her a rush of dopamine. And fraternizing with the staff, distracting them? She was helping me, Eleanor said calmly. Sarah doesn't get paid to help you, Jessica snapped. She turned to the young intern. Sarah, get back to your desk. If those renderings aren't on my desk in 20 minutes, don't bother coming in tomorrow. Sarah fled the room, looking like she was about to cry. Jessica turned back to Eleanor, a smirk playing on her red lips. Well, you cleaned the floor. Good for you. You're trainable. I did what you asked, Eleanor said, clutching her grocery bag closer. Now, I need to go to the 40th floor. I need to see Arthur. Jessica laughed, shaking her head. Oh, honey. You don't get to go to the 40th floor looking like a drowned rat. The board is starting to arrive. If they see you, they'll think we're running a charity ward. You said if I cleaned the spill. I lied, Jessica interrupted, her eyes gleaming with malice. Welcome to the corporate world. Things change. She walked over to the counter and picked up a heavy tray filled with ceramic mugs, a pitcher of ice water, and a silver pot of coffee. It was the refreshment tray for the conference room down the hall, Conference Room B, where the mid-level managers were meeting. However, Jessica said, I am a fair woman. I have one more task. If you handle this, I will personally escort you to the service elevator that goes direct to the penthouse suite. Eleanor looked at the heavy tray. Her arthritis was flaring up in the cold dampness. What is it? Take this tray to Conference Room B, Jessica ordered. Serve the coffee. Don't speak. Don't look anyone in the eye. Just pour. Then collect the trash. If you do that without spilling a drop, then you can see Arthur. It was a setup. Eleanor knew it. Jessica wanted to humiliate her in front of an audience. She wanted to turn the crazy lady into a spectacle for the staff's amusement. But Eleanor also knew something Jessica didn't. She knew who was in Conference Room B. It wasn't just mid-level managers. On Tuesdays, Arthur often sat in on the project reviews in that room. If Arthur was there, this charade would end instantly. Fine, Eleanor said. I'll serve the coffee. Excellent, Jessica beamed. Off you go. Chop, chop. Eleanor picked up the heavy tray. Her arms trembled slightly under the weight, but she steadied herself. She walked out of the break room, down the long corridor, lined with glass-walled offices. She could feel eyes on her. The rumor of the wet, homeless woman had spread. People were looking up from their computers to gawk. She kept her head high. She focused on the door at the end of the hall. Conference Room B. She reached the door. It was closed. She couldn't open it with her hands full. She stood there for a moment, waiting. Behind her, she heard Jessica's heels clicking. Jessica wasn't leaving. She was following to watch the show. She wanted to see Eleanor struggle. Problem? Jessica asked from 10 feet away. The door, Eleanor said. Figure it out, Jessica replied, crossing her arms. Eleanor took a deep breath. She shifted the weight of the tray to her left hip, balancing it precariously, and reached out with her right hand to turn the handle. The coffee pot wobbled. Hot liquid sloshed near the rim. She managed to turn the handle and push the door open with her hip. She stumbled slightly as she entered the room. The room went silent. There were 12 people around the long oval table. The air was thick with tension. At the head of the table sat a man with silver hair, rubbing his temples, looking exhausted. It was Arthur. He was looking down at a stack of blueprints, his glasses perched on the end of his nose. He didn't look up immediately. "Who is that?" a woman near the door asked sharply. "We're in a closed session." Eleanor stood at the end of the table. She was wet, her hair was a mess, she was wearing a janitorial badge, and she was holding a tray of coffee. Jessica stepped into the doorway behind Eleanor, ready to savor the moment. She spoke up, her voice loud and clear. "Apologies, everyone," Jessica announced, stepping into the light. "The regular catering staff was unavailable. I found this temporary worker to assist with refreshments. She's a bit slow, but she's cheap." A few people chuckled. Arthur Vance stopped rubbing his temples. He knew that voice. Jessica's. But something else caught his ear. A soft gasp. A presence he had known for 30 years. He looked up. His eyes scanned the room and landed on the woman standing at the foot of the table holding the tray. Time seemed to stop. Arthur blinked. He took off his glasses and wiped them, thinking the stress was causing hallucinations. He put them back on. The woman was still there. She was looking at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and patience. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Arthur's face went pale, then flushed with a sudden, violent red. He didn't see a janitor. He didn't see a homeless woman. He saw the woman who had sold her grandmother's jewelry to fund his first architecture license. He saw the woman who had nursed him through cancer 5 years ago. He saw the woman who legally owned the building they were sitting in. He saw his wife, and she was holding a tray of coffee like a servant. Jessica, oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere, poked Eleanor in the back. "Well, don't just stand there. Pour Mr. Vance a cup, and make sure it's hot." The silence in the room stretched, becoming heavy and suffocating. The other executives looked from Jessica to the frozen CEO, confused. Arthur slowly placed his hands on the table. He didn't look at Jessica. He kept his eyes locked on Eleanor. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracking. Jessica froze. The smirk dropped from her face. She looked at Arthur, then at the disheveled woman. "Mr. Vance?" Jessica laughed nervously. You know this woman. She's just a solicitor I found in the lobby." Arthur ignored Jessica. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He didn't walk. He scrambled around the table, moving faster than anyone had seen him move in years. "Eleanor, my God," Arthur said, reaching her. He didn't care about the tray. He grabbed it from her trembling hands and slammed it down on the conference table, not caring that coffee splashed onto the blueprints. "Arthur, careful," Eleanor said softly, her voice returning to its normal, gentle cadence. "Those look like the schematics for the Tokyo project." "To hell with the Tokyo project," Arthur shouted, his voice echoing off the glass walls. He grabbed Eleanor's hands. They were ice cold. He saw the janitorial badge pinned to her cardigan. He looked at the badge. Then he looked at Jessica. The look on Arthur Vance's face was terrifying. It wasn't anger. It was the cold, destructive fury of a man who has just seen his entire world disrespected. "Jessica," Arthur said. His voice was a low growl. Jessica took a step back, her confidence shattering like dropped glass. "Arthur, I didn't know. She didn't say who she was. She just came in looking like that. She said she had a delivery." "She is my wife," Arthur roared, the sound making the executives jump in their seats. "She is Eleanor Vance. She is the co-founder of this firm." The room gasped collectively. All eyes turned to Eleanor, the simple woman in the orthopedic shoes, the janitor. Eleanor gently pulled her hands from Arthur's. She reached into her grocery bag, the bag Jessica had mocked, and pulled out the Tupperware container. "I brought your lunch, Arthur," she said, her voice calm amidst the chaos. "And your heart medication. You forgot it on the counter this morning. I was worried." She placed the Tupperware on the table next to the spilled coffee. Then she reached into the bag again and pulled out the manila envelope. "And," Eleanor added, turning slowly to face a trembling Jessica, I brought the partnership deed. Because after what I've seen in the last hour, I think we need to make some changes to the bylaws. Jessica was hyperventilating. Mrs. Vance, please. It was a misunderstanding. Security protocol. I was just trying to protect the firm. Eleanor took a step toward Jessica. She didn't shout, she didn't scream. She just looked at her with disappointment. You made me clean a floor, Jessica, Eleanor stated. It wasn't a question. Jessica stammered. You made me carry boxes. You called me a wet dog. You told a young intern she would be fired for showing me kindness. Eleanor paused, letting the words sink in for the audience in the room. Is that how you protect this firm? By stripping people of their dignity? I can explain. No, Eleanor said firmly. You can't? But we aren't done yet. Eleanor turned to Arthur. Arthur, the board meeting is in 30 minutes? Yes, Arthur said, still holding her arm as if afraid she would vanish. Good, Eleanor said. She unpinned the janitorial badge and dropped it into Jessica's open, trembling hand. I'm going to the washroom to dry off. Arthur, give me your jacket. I'm attending the meeting. You're attending? Arthur asked. Yes, Eleanor said, her eyes hardening. I'm exercising my voting rights as the majority shareholder. And Jessica? Jessica looked up, tears of panic welling in her eyes. You're coming too, Eleanor said. I want the board to hear exactly what your vision for this company is, especially the part about cutting the design department. Eleanor took Arthur's suit jacket, draped it over her shoulders and walked out of the room. She didn't look like a janitor anymore. She looked like a queen who had just returned from exile to execute the traitors. Arthur looked at Jessica one last time. If she is still wet when the meeting starts, he said coldly, you better pray to a god you believe in. Arthur followed his wife. Jessica was left standing in the silence of Conference Room B, holding the cheap plastic badge, as 12 executives stared at her like she was a dead woman walking. The executive elevator was a silent sanctuary compared to the chaos below. Arthur stood in the corner, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted the collar of the suit jacket now draped over his wife's shoulders. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the water stains on her dress and the exhaustion etched into the lines of her face. I should fire everyone, Arthur murmured, his voice thick with guilt. I should fire security. I should fire the receptionists. I should burn this whole building down for how they treated you. Eleanor reached out, placing a warm hand on his cheek. Arthur, stop. You aren't burning anything down. We build things. Remember? But Eleanor, they made you clean the floor. He choked on the words, the image of his wife on her knees, searing his pride. I learned a lot on that floor, she said, her voice sharpening. I learned that the culture in this company has rotted, Arthur. While you've been up in the penthouse worrying about blueprints and legacy, a poison has been spreading downstairs. Jessica isn't just one bad apple. She's the result of a system that values aggression over humanity. The elevator dinged softly, signaling the 40th floor. Eleanor straightened her spine. She reached up and smoothed her wet hair back. Without a mirror, she somehow managed to look regal. I don't have time to change, she said, and frankly I don't want to. Let them see me like this. Let them see exactly what their efficiency looks like. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, Jessica Thorne was in the women's restroom, frantically splashing cold water on her face. Her waterproof mascara held, but her composure was fracturing. She stared at herself in the mirror. She is the wife. The thought hammered in her skull, the CEO's wife. But Jessica was a survivor. She hadn't clawed her way from a trailer park to a corner office by giving up when things got messy. She grabbed her phone and dialed a number. "Marcus," she hissed when the line connected. "We have a problem. Vance's wife is here. She's eccentric. She looks like a bag lady. She's going to crash the meeting." On the other end, Marcus Sterling, the nephew of the firm's late co-founder and a man who cared only for share prices, chuckled. "Eleanor, she hasn't been to a board meeting in a decade. She's soft, Jessica. She's a gardener, not a shark. Let her come. If she looks as crazy as you say, it will only help our case to remove Arthur. We'll paint him as distracted by domestic issues. Just stick to the script. The Vegas numbers are undeniable." Jessica hung up, a cold calm settling over her. Marcus was right. This wasn't a disaster. It was an opportunity. Eleanor Vance wasn't a businessman. She was a relic, and relics belonged in museums, not boardrooms. Jessica smoothed her skirt, reapplied her lipstick, a shade called Power Red, and marched toward the elevators. She would walk into that meeting not as a bully, but as the only professional in the room. The boardroom of Sterling and Vance was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The table was a slab of black walnut, 20 feet long. Around it sat 10 of the most powerful people in Chicago, finance and development. The air was filled with the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of china. At the far end sat Marcus Sterling. He was younger than Arthur, tanned, fit, and wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He checked his watch theatrically. "Arthur is late," Marcus announced to the room, "and on the day of the restructuring vote. Concerning." The heavy double doors swung open. Arthur walked in first. He looked furious, his jaw set hard, but it was the person following him that sucked the air out of the room. Eleanor walked in. She was wearing Arthur's oversized suit jacket, which swallowed her small frame. Underneath, her floral dress was wrinkled and damp. Her orthopedic shoes squeaked slightly on the polished floor. A hush fell over the room. One board member, a woman named Cynthia, actually dropped her spoon. "Gentlemen, ladies," Arthur said, his voice ringing with a strange, dangerous energy. "Apologies for the delay. My wife, Eleanor, had some difficulty getting through our robust security measures." He pulled out the chair at the head of the table, his chair, but he didn't sit. He gestured for Eleanor to sit there. Murmurs broke out. This was a breach of protocol. The CEO sat at the head. Spouses, if they attended at all, sat against the wall. "Arthur," Marcus Sterling said, leaning back with a shark-like grin, "this is a surprise." "Hello, Eleanor. It's been years. Did you get caught in the rain?" "Something like that, Marcus," Eleanor said. She didn't sit. She stood at the head of the table, resting her hands on the black walnut. She looked small, but her eyes were scanning every face, cataloguing them. "I assume you're here to observe?" Marcus pressed, his tone patronizing. "We have some very complex financial modeling to discuss today. It might be a bit dry for you." "I'm here to vote, Marcus," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I still hold the proxy for the 51% stake Arthur and I share, and I decided it was time I stopped being a silent partner." Before Marcus could respond, the doors opened again. Jessica Thorne entered. She was the picture of corporate perfection, not a hair out of place. She carried a leather portfolio and walked with a confident stride, ignoring Eleanor completely. She took her seat near Marcus, nodding to the board members. "My apologies," Jessica said smoothly. "I was handling a personnel issue downstairs. Shall we begin?" Marcus tapped the table. "Yes. Let's get to it. Jessica has prepared a presentation on the modernization initiative. I believe it's the only way to save this company from stagnation." He looked at Arthur, then dismissively at Eleanor. "Unless, of course, we want to discuss gardening tips first." A few of the younger board members snickered. Jessica smiled, a tight, victorious smile. They were underestimating Eleanor. They saw the clothes, not the woman. "Proceed, Jessica," Arthur said, taking a seat to Eleanor's right. He crossed his arms. "I'm dying to hear this." Jessica stood up and dimmed the lights. A massive screen descended, glowing with charts and graphs. All the arrows pointed up. "Sterling and Vance is a legacy brand," Jessica began, her voice practiced and hypnotic. "But legacy doesn't pay the bills in 2025. Our competitors are building faster, cheaper, and with higher margins. We are bogged down in artistry. We spend 6 months designing a lobby that our competitors design in 2 weeks with AI." She clicked a button. The screen showed a picture of the Vegas Horizon Casino, a gaudy, massive glass tower. "We turned this down," Jessica said, injecting sadness into her tone. "A $200 million contract. Why? Because the design required materials that were environmentally taxing. Because the client wanted to cut corners on labor." She looked around the room, making eye contact with the greedy members. "We are leaving money on the table because we are clinging to outdated morals. My proposal is simple. We cut the custom design division by 70%. We pivot to commercial modular construction. We automate the drafting process. And," she paused for dramatic effect, "we replace the current COO role with a director of efficiency, a role I am prepared to step into." The room was silent. The numbers were compelling. Marcus Sterling was nodding vigorously. "Brilliant," Marcus said. "Finally, someone speaking the language of profit. Arthur, you have to admit, your way is dying. We need this." Arthur looked at the screen, pain in his eyes. It was the death of his life's work. "Is that all?" Eleanor asked. The room turned to her. She was still standing in the semi-darkness. "Excuse me?" Jessica asked, blinking. "Is that your whole pitch?" Eleanor stepped forward, into the light of the projector. The graph of rising profits projected across her damp floral dress. "Cut the artists, fire the craftsmen, build cheap boxes, make millions." "It's called business, Eleanor," Marcus snapped. "I wouldn't expect you to understand the complexities of—" "I understand that you're selling the soul of this company for a quarterly bonus," Eleanor interrupted. Her voice had changed. The rasp was gone. It was clear, authoritative, and sharp as a knife. She reached into her Trader Joe's bag, which she had placed on the table. The sound of the crinkling plastic was deafening in the quiet room. She pulled out the janitorial badge Jessica had given her. She tossed it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Jessica. "Do you know what this is?" Eleanor asked Jessica. Jessica swallowed hard. "It's a badge." "It's a test," Eleanor said. She looked at the board. 2 hours ago, I walked into this building. I didn't look like a rich woman. I looked like someone in need. And your director of efficiency here didn't just turn me away. She mocked me. She humiliated me. She forced me to clean a spill in the break room to earn the right to speak to a receptionist. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Cynthia looked horrified. "She called me a wet dog," Eleanor continued, her eyes locking onto Marcus. "Is that the efficiency you want, Marcus? A culture where human dignity is the first thing to be cut?" "That's unfortunate," Marcus stammered. "But it's hardly relevant to the financial strategy." "It is entirely relevant," Eleanor's voice rose, filling the room. "Because if she treats a harmless old woman like trash, imagine how she treats our clients. Imagine how she treats our employees." Eleanor reached into her bag again. This time she didn't pull out a sandwich. She pulled out a stack of papers, damp at the edges but legible. "I sat in the break room," Eleanor said, pacing the room now. "I was invisible, so I listened. I heard your analysts talking. They aren't inspired by you, Jessica. They're terrified. They're looking for other jobs. You aren't building a future. You're running a sweatshop." She slammed the papers down in front of Arthur. "And I heard something else," Eleanor said, turning to Jessica with a gaze that could melt steel. "I heard you mention a side deal regarding the Vegas project. Something about a consulting fee paid directly to an offshore account if the board approved the contract today." The color drained from Jessica's face instantly. It was a bluff. Eleanor had only heard vague rumors in the break room, but Jessica's reaction confirmed it was true. "That's a lie!" Jessica shrieked, standing up. "She's crazy. Look at her. She's senile." "Am I?" Eleanor asked softly. "Then why are you shaking?" Arthur stood up slowly. He looked at the papers Eleanor had put down. They were just the old partnership deeds, but he understood what his wife was doing. She was exposing the rot. "Jessica," Arthur said, his voice low and final, "did you take a kickback on the Vegas bid?" "No," Jessica yelled. "Marcus, tell them. This is insane." Marcus Sterling went silent. He looked at Jessica's panic, then at Eleanor's steely calm. He was a greedy man, but he wasn't stupid. He saw the ship sinking, and he wasn't going to go down with it. I know nothing about any kickbacks," Marcus said coldly, looking away. Jessica gasped. She was alone. Eleanor walked around the table until she stood right next to Jessica. She leaned in close. "You told me to clean the floor to prove my worth," Eleanor whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I did it. Now, it's your turn. Prove you're worth saving. Tell the truth." The room hung in suspended animation. The simple woman had cornered the shark, and she hadn't even raised her voice. Jessica Thorne stood trembling at the edge of the boardroom table. The silence in the room was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of her lungs. Her eyes darted from Marcus, who was studiously inspecting a smudge on the mahogany table, to Arthur, whose face was a mask of cold fury, and finally to Eleanor. Eleanor, the woman in the damp cardigan. The woman she had sent to clean a floor. "You're bluffing," Jessica hissed, though her voice lacked its usual steel. "You're just a housewife. You don't have access to the financial logs. You don't know anything about offshore accounts." Eleanor didn't blink. She reached for the pitcher of water on the table, crystal, heavy, expensive, and poured herself a glass with steady hands. She took a sip, letting the silence stretch, letting Jessica sweat. "You're right, Jessica," Eleanor said softly. "I don't have the logs. I don't have your bank statements." Jessica let out a breath, a short, sharp laugh of relief. She turned to the board, her confidence surging back like a tide. "You see? It's slander. She's making it up to discredit me because of the incident in the lobby. She's unstable." "However," Eleanor interrupted, her voice cutting through Jessica's laughter, "I didn't need the logs. I just needed to see your face." Eleanor turned to Arthur. "Arthur, do you remember the forensic audit you ordered last month? The one regarding the discrepancies in the procurement budget?" Arthur nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Jessica. "I do. And do you remember saying you suspected a leak in the executive team, but you couldn't prove who it was?" Eleanor asked. "Yes." "Well," Eleanor gestured to Jessica, who was now paling rapidly. "I believe we just found our leak. Only someone terrified of exposure reacts the way she just did. An innocent person gets angry, Jessica. A guilty person gets scared." Jessica gripped the back of her leather chair, her knuckles white. This is ridiculous. I am the director of operations. I have brought in $3 million in new business this quarter. You can't touch me based on a hunch." She turned to Marcus Sterling. "Marcus, say something. We are partners in this. The restructuring, the Vegas deal, we agreed." It was a fatal error. In her panic, she had tried to drag Marcus down with her. Marcus Sterling looked up. His eyes were hard and devoid of loyalty. He saw a sinking ship, and he was already on the lifeboat. "I agreed to a business proposal, Jessica," Marcus said smoothly, his voice icy. "I did not agree to bid rigging or kickbacks. If you have conducted unethical business, that is entirely on you." Jessica gasped. The betrayal was absolute. She looked around the room. 10 faces stared back at her. Some with pity, most with disgust. She was alone. "Arthur," Jessica pleaded, her voice cracking. "Please, I've given my life to this firm for 6 months. I work 80 hours a week. I made a mistake with your wife. I admit it. I was stressed. I'll apologize. I'll do anything." Arthur stood up. He walked over to where Jessica stood. He was not a tall man, but in that moment, he looked like a giant. "You didn't make a mistake with my wife," Arthur said quietly. "You revealed your character. You looked at a human being and saw trash. You looked at a company built on art and saw a factory. You are the antithesis of everything the Sterling and Vance stands for." Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once. "Security?" Arthur said into the phone. "Send a team to the boardroom, and send Kevin. Specifically, Kevin." Jessica's eyes went wide. "No, you can't." "I can," Arthur said. "You're fired, Jessica. Effective immediately. Your access to the server has already been revoked. My IT director was listening in via the conference line. He cut you off 5 minutes ago." The double doors swung open. 2 large security guards entered. Behind them, looking nervous but determined, was Kevin, the young guard from the lobby. Kevin saw Eleanor standing at the head of the table. He saw Jessica trembling. He saw the CEO. "Kevin," Eleanor said warmly, "thank you for coming up." "Mrs. Vance," Kevin stammered. I hope everything is all right." "It is now," Eleanor said. She pointed to Jessica. "Please escort Ms. Thorne to her office to collect her personal effects. Monitor her closely. She is to take nothing that belongs to the company. No files, no hard drives." Jessica drew herself up, trying to salvage one last shred of dignity. She smoothed her skirt, glared at Eleanor, and spat. "You're making a mistake. This company will crumble without me. You're all dinosaurs." "Perhaps," Eleanor said, taking another sip of water. "But at least we won't be extinct." "And Jessica?" Arthur added. Jessica stopped at the door. "Use the service elevator," Arthur said. "The main lifts are for employees and guests. You are neither." Jessica let out a choked sob of rage and stormed out, Kevin and the guards trailing her. The heavy doors clicked shut. The room was silent again. Eleanor let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping slightly as the adrenaline faded. She looked at the board. "Now," Eleanor said, her voice tired but firm, "about this modernization initiative. I believe we have a vote to cast." She looked at Marcus Sterling. "Marcus?" Marcus cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. Upon reflection, and in light of recent personnel revelations, I move to table the initiative indefinitely. The Vegas project is not a good fit for us." "Seconded," Cynthia said immediately. "Motion passed," Arthur said. He looked at his wife. For the first time in years, the crushing weight on his shoulders was gone. He didn't just have a partner at home, he had a partner in the war room. The rain had stopped by the time Eleanor and Arthur left the boardroom, leaving the Chicago skyline scrubbed clean and glistening in the afternoon sun. They didn't go back to the penthouse office. Instead, they took the elevator down to the 4th floor, the engine room. The floor was quiet. News traveled fast in a corporate tower. Whispers of Jessica's dramatic exit had already circulated. When the elevator doors opened and the CEO and the janitor walked out, heads snapped up. Keyboards went silent. Eleanor walked straight to the break room. The spill was gone, the floor spotless. She turned the corner to the rows of cubicles. She found the one she was looking for. Sarah, the intern, was sitting at her desk, frantically typing. She looked terrified. She had been expecting to be fired all afternoon because she hadn't finished the renderings on time. Sarah! Sarah jumped, spinning her chair around. Her eyes widened when she saw Arthur Vance standing there. Then she saw the woman beside him, the woman she had helped. "Oh," Sarah gasped. "Ma'am, you're still here. Did you get in trouble?" Eleanor smiled. It was a genuine, grandmotherly smile. "No, dear. I didn't get in trouble. But I believe you were threatened with termination earlier?" Sarah looked down at her shoes. Ms. Thorne said if I didn't finish the renderings, Ms. Thorne is no longer with the company," Arthur said gently. Sarah's head snapped up. "She isn't?" "No," Arthur continued, "and my wife tells me that you possess a quality we have been lacking severely in this building." "Your wife?" Sarah looked from Arthur to Eleanor, her mouth falling open. But the coffee, the spill." "A test," Eleanor said, winking. "One you passed with flying colors." Arthur stepped forward. "Sarah, what is your degree in?" "Architecture, sir. I have a master's from Clean Illinois Tech, but I've just been doing coffee runs and data entry." "Not anymore," Arthur said. "We have an opening in the custom design division, junior architect. You'll be working directly under me on the restoration of the St. Jude Cathedral. It requires patience, empathy, and an eye for detail. I think you have all three." Sarah started to cry. She covered her mouth with her hand, nodding frantically. Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much." "Don't thank me," Arthur said, nodding toward Eleanor. "Thank the lady who cleaned the floor with you." Eleanor patted Sarah's shoulder. "Just promise me one thing, Sarah." "Anything." "When you become a director one day," Eleanor said seriously, "never let anyone in your lobby feel invisible." "I promise," Sarah whispered. Arthur and Eleanor walked toward the elevators, leaving a stunned silence in their wake. As they passed the security desk in the lobby, Kevin snapped to attention. He didn't look scared anymore. He looked proud. "Have a good evening, Mr. Vance." "Mrs. Vance," Kevin said, beaming. "Good night, Kevin," Eleanor said. "And Kevin, expect a raise in your next paycheck. Hazard pay for dealing with difficult executives." Kevin grinned. "Thank you, ma'am." They walked out through the revolving doors and onto Michigan Avenue. The air was crisp and cold. Arthur took his jacket from Eleanor's shoulders and put it back on, then wrapped his arm around her waist. "You know," Arthur said, "you were terrifying in there." "Was I?" Eleanor chuckled. "I was shaking in my orthopedic shoes. You saved the company, Elle. You saved me. I was ready to give up. I thought the world had moved on and left us behind." Eleanor stopped. She looked at the towering building of glass and steel, their legacy. "The world changes, Arthur," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Styles change. Technology changes. But decency? Decency never goes out of style. We just have to remind people of that sometimes." "Well," Arthur smiled, flagging down a taxi. "Remind me never to ask you to make coffee again." Eleanor laughed. "Oh, I don't mind making coffee, as long as I don't have to wear a badge to do it." The taxi pulled up. Arthur held the door open for his wife, the simple woman who had brought down an empire of arrogance with a grocery bag and a spine of steel. They got in, and the taxi merged into the traffic, disappearing into the city they had helped build, leaving the Sterling Tower standing a little taller, a little brighter, and a whole lot more human than it had been that morning. In a world obsessed with appearances, Eleanor Vance proved that true power doesn't wear a three-piece suit. It wears kindness, and sometimes a wet cardigan. Jessica Thorne learned the hard way that when you strip away a person's dignity, you might just be stripping away your own future. It costs nothing to be kind, but as we saw today, arrogance can cost you everything. If you enjoyed this story of karma and justice, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were in Eleanor's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.